Just tell us about your, your sample group, how it worked, just the results, because people are listening out there and saying, no, you can't reverse type 2 diabetes. It's impossible. I've
Yeah.
been on chronic medications for so long. And, I've been a physician, for 26 years here. So just give us that whole process because I think that's very important.
I started this because my mother-in-law ended up in the hospital, and I didn't think she should have had to end up there. And that hospital stay cost about $100,000 US, and it could have been prevented with, like, let's call it $10 of medicine with just the right improvement. And after that hospitalization, I talked to her medical doctors, and I'm really impressed with her medical doctors. They're really talented people. And so I went back to the University of Southern California and said, I want to come and get my doctorate. I want to talk about reversing type 2 diabetes at scale. And I think there was a lot of like, hey, we've been trying to do that for 60 years. Good luck. Like, not going to happen, but come on in. We'll
Mm,
see what you can. And so we did this pilot study that you mentioned, and we took 50 patients in rural Louisiana here in the States, very low income, very low access to care, and very sick. So for the people in the medical community, average A1C, hemoglobin A1C of 9.6%.
sure.
And so very, very sick. And so generally speaking, when you have a drug that can reduce hemoglobin A1C by 1 percentage point in 12 months, you've got $1 billion drug. We were able to reduce their hemoglobin A1C by 3.2% in 12 weeks, and then keep those people in control for the next 2 years, 83% of them without any hospitalization for diabetes or any complications relating to diabetes. And so fairly radical success in our pilot study. And we just finished data collection on our next study that we have not yet published, where we took people with an average A1C of 11 and dropped it to 7.88 in 90 days, and then further
Wow.
reduced it to 7.22 in 90 days further. Even more importantly, at 180 days, a third of those people came off of insulin entirely.
Sure. Those are the
Jaw-dropping
people.
results.
I want you to go through those stats and results from the first and second study slowly. If you're listing out there, your HbA alpha 1c is an approximation of your 3 month glucose average level. So that's when your doctor does it. Of course, that's just, looking at glucose, not fasting insulin that can be raised for up to 15 years. But Dr. John's dealing with some really sick people. So I think very slowly and carefully, people are listening out there. They might even have a good idea of what HbA alpha 1c is. You significantly dropped that and maintained over a 2 year process. Just repeat those stats.
Yeah, so for the first pilot study, we went from 9.6 to 6.4 in
Wow.
12 weeks.
Wow.
And we did that for the providers out there. We did that using only metformin and insulin. So no other drugs, no GLP-1s, no SGLT2s, just metformin and insulin. And so that was the first pilot study. And that was the control group that we kept in control for, the group we kept in control for 2 years after that first 12 weeks. The one person we couldn't get into control had an autoimmune condition that required a very specialized form of care. They were
Mm,
taking 200 units of insulin a day with no impact. So it was a very, very exotic problem that we couldn't
yeah.
get solved with our process.
Okay. All right.
That
So,
was that was study number one.
yeah. And study number two.
Study number two, we had 79 patients. The average A1C for that group was 11.06, so with a standard deviation below 2. And we actually took that group to 7.88 average within 90 days. So a larger drop, right? 6.5% is kind of where you want to get people
Yeah.
into control. So 90 days to get them from 11.06 down to 7.88. And then the second 90-day period, we got them from 7.88 down to 7.22. We'll then get people eventually down to 6.5 over time. But that was the study design that we did. And in that particular study, we took roughly one third of our patients off of insulin at the end of 6 months.
Oh, and that's off of insulin at the end of 6 months. Never mind if they carry on a year later to come off the medications. And yes, you use
That's right.
medications, but I want you to speak into the AI part of your business at Priscina Health, and we'll get into your backstory of how you scaled businesses. Just talk about that. I think from understanding, it's a three-prong attack of behavioral therapy or behavioral science, and then using AI and then personal care. So let's talk about the AI side, which I think technology is going to be the only way for us to beat chronic disease and to prevent chronic disease.
And I think you're right. And I think it's a little bit counterintuitive as to how we approached it. We took everything we knew about medicine in the medical clinic, everything we knew about behavioral health, everything we knew about non-clinical issues, typically talked about as the social determinants of health. But then we went further and looked at other models of health belief systems. And then we looked at non-clinical variables that perhaps hadn't been considered in a similar fashion before, things that were thought of, but maybe not applied. And we then put a severity score across all of these different things. So what's the severity scoring of diabetes? How about comorbid cardiovascular disease? What's happening with other things like a broken ankle, maybe in some cases for some of our patients? And we took a look at all of the mental health issues, anxiety, depression, stress, highly comorbid with chronic disease, but then also some other, mental health issues that may not be comorbid. Sorry, they are comorbid, but not caused by disease, right? So, for example, we
Mm.
had one person dealing with grief because they lost their husband a year ago and hadn't gone through grief counseling. That was a real case that happened inside of our
Mm.
practice. Then we look at the social determinants of health that are actionable, non-actionable. This is an overwhelming amount of data, too much for any patient to kind of take on all at once. So we applied readiness for change and said, where is the patient ready to make a change? And we focused on that singular area to make very small changes. And when I was reading about you, I think you and I have this in common. You talk to people about making small changes to make a big difference. And you've been talking about this for, it seems like 20 years. And
Yeah.
so you're onto something. Yeah,
Mm.
we talk about and no matter how big the change the patient's willing to make, we make it smaller. And I'll give you a couple real examples. We had one patient who was the early stages of dementia, was only taking in calories with ice cream and chocolate milk. And they were unwilling to change that. And we said, no problem. What if we just change the type of ice cream you're eating? They said, okay, I'm willing to do that. So we changed the type of ice cream and we changed their fasting blood sugar by 100 points in 7 days.